in the high, wind-swept plateaus of Central Asia. A storm was gathering at the dawn of the 13th century. It was a world of shifting sands, endless grass, and fractured tribes. A place where life was cheap and loyalty was bought with blood. Yet, from this harsh wilderness, a single man would emerge to forge the largest contiguous land empire in human history. Nobles and khans, silk and steel, terror and tolerance. These were the pillars of an empire that bridged east and west. This is the story of how the modern world was catalyzed by the hoofbeats of the Mongol steppe. The boy from the steppe. In the 1160s, the Mongol tribes were anything but an empire. They were a chaotic collection of nomadic clans, constantly feuding over watering holes and livestock. Into this world of perpetual raid and reprisal, a boy named Temujin was born. His early life was defined by catastrophe. His father, a minor chieftain, was poisoned by a rival tribe. Cast out by their own clan, Temujin's family was reduced to eating roots and rodents to survive. It was in this crucible of poverty and abandonment that Temujin learned the cold mathematics of survival. He learned that blood relations meant nothing without loyalty, and that strength was the only currency the steppe respected. Through a series of daring escapes, strategic marriages, and brutal tribal politics, Temujin began to do the impossible. He unified the fractured Mongols. He broke the traditional aristocratic order, promoting men based on merit and bravery rather than birthright. By 1206, at a great assembly known as a Kurultai, the disparate tribes of the steppe knelt before him. They granted him a new title, Genghis Khan, the great Khan's war machine. Genghis Khan did not just lead an army, he engineered a biological and tactical juggernaut. The Mongol horseman was perhaps the most efficient killing machine of the pre-modern era. Every soldier was a master of the composite bow, capable of loosing arrows with deadly precision while at a full gallop. But the true genius lay in organization. Genghis implemented a decimal system, dividing his army into units of 10, 100, 1,000, and 10,000, the two men. This allowed for unprecedented communication and flexibility on the battlefield. Their tactics were psychological as much as they were physical. The Mongols mastered the feigned retreat, fleeing the battlefield in apparent panic to draw the enemy into a pursuit, only to wheel around and shower the exhausted foe with arrows. To the knights of Europe and the cataphracts of Persia, the Mongols seemed less like men and more like a force of nature. The conquest of China. With the steppe unified, Genghis turned his hungry eyes toward the sedentary civilizations to the south. China, at the time, was divided into several competing dynasties: the Western Xia, the Jin, and the Southern Song. The Mongols first struck the Western Xia, forcing them into submission. Then, they turned toward the Jin dynasty, a formidable power with massive walled cities. Here, the nomadic Mongols faced a problem. Their cavalry was useless against stone walls. Proving his adaptability, Genghis Khan conscripted Chinese engineers. He turned the technology of his enemies against them, developing a sophisticated siege train of catapults, trebuchets, and battering rams. In 1215, the Jin capital of Zhengdu, modern-day Beijing, fell. The barbarians from the north had breached the heart of the world's most advanced civilization. The Khwarezmian catastrophe. If the invasion of China was about expansion, the invasion of Central Asia was about vengeance. In 1218, Genghis Khan sent a trade caravan to the Khwarezmian Empire, a wealthy Islamic state spanning modern-day Iran and Uzbekistan. The local governor, suspecting the traders were spies, executed them. It was a fatal mistake. Genghis Khan unleashed a whirlwind. He divided his forces, crossing the impassable Kazilkum Desert to appear behind the enemy lines. Cities like Samarkand and Bukhara, jewels of the Islamic Golden Age, were systematically dismantled. Libraries were burned, irrigation systems were destroyed, and the population was decimated. The Shah of Khwarezm died a fugitive on a lonely island in the Caspian Sea. The message to the rest of the world was clear. To submit to the Mongols was to survive. To resist was to be erased from history. The Mongol Peace, Pax Mongolica. While the name Genghis Khan is often synonymous with slaughter, the empire he built ushered in an era of unprecedented global connectivity. This period is known as the Pax Mongolica. For the first time in history, a single political authority governed the Silk Road from China to the Black Sea. The Mongols established the Yam, a sophisticated postal relay system that allowed messages to travel thousands of miles in a matter of days. Under Mongol protection, trade flourished. Ideas, technologies, and religions flowed freely across the continent. Papermaking, gunpowder, and the compass moved from east to west. In return, Western science and medicinal knowledge reached the east. The Mongols were surprisingly tolerant, hosting debates between Christians, Muslims, Buddhists, and Taoists at the imperial court. They realized that a stable, prosperous empire was far more profitable than a smoldering ruin. The death of a legend. In 1227, while campaigning against the rebellious Western Saya, Genghis Khan passed away. The circumstances of his death remain shrouded in mystery. Some say he fell from his horse. Others claim he succumbed to illness. To this day, the location of his tomb is one of history's greatest secrets. According to legend, the funeral escort killed anyone they met on the way to the burial site to ensure total secrecy. Once the Khan was laid to rest, thousands of horses were driven over the grave to flatten the earth, and a river was allegedly diverted to flow over it. The man who had conquered the world disappeared back into the steppe, leaving his empire to his 4 sons. Ogedei and the expansion to the west, Genghis's 3rd son, Ogedei Khan, was elected as his successor. While Genghis was the conqueror, Ogedei was the builder. He established a permanent capital at Karakoram and pushed the empire's borders to their absolute limit. In the 1230s, the Mongol Golden Horde, led by Batu Khan and the brilliant general Subutai, galloped into Europe. They crushed the principalities of Kievan Rus, leaving only a trail of ash behind them. In 1241, they decimated the combined armies of Poland and Hungary in 2 separate battles, fought just days apart. Europe was paralyzed with fear. The Tartars, as they called them, seemed unstoppable. Central Europe lay open for the taking. But then, as if by a miracle, the Mongol tide receded. News had reached the front lines that Ogedei Khan had died in Mongolia. The law required the princes to return to Karakoram for a new election. A heartbeat saved Europe. Kublai Khan and the Yuan dynasty. The climax of the Mongol story took place in the east, with the rise of Kublai Khan, Genghis Khan's grandson. Kublai was a different kind of Mongol. He was fascinated by the sedentary culture of China. After a long and bloody struggle, Kublai finally conquered the southern Song dynasty, becoming the first non-Chinese ruler to govern the entirety of China. He established the Yuan dynasty and moved the capital to Dadu, which is now Beijing. It was during Kublai's reign that a Venetian merchant named Marco Polo arrived at the Mongol court. Polo's accounts of the splendor, wealth, and efficiency of the Khan's empire would later ignite the European imagination and inspire the Age of Discovery. Kublai's court was the center of the world, a cosmopolitan hub where Persian astronomers worked alongside Chinese mathematicians. The fragmentation, a house divided. No empire, no matter how vast or seemingly invincible, can remain unified forever. History teaches us that the greater the expansion, the more inevitable the collapse of central authority. By the late 13th century, the sheer scale of the Mongol Empire became its greatest administrative burden. Following the death of Mongke Khan, the unity of the Mongol world shattered during a period of civil war known as the Toluid Civil War. What emerged from the dust of this conflict was not a single monolithic state, but four distinct and increasingly autonomous khanates. Each of these realms began to take on the unique characteristics of the territories they occupied. The Yuan dynasty, centered in China and Mongolia, where the Mongol elite eventually adopted the administrative traditions of the Han Chinese and became patrons of Confucianism. The Golden Horde, dominating the Russian forests and the Eurasian steppe, maintaining a traditional nomadic lifestyle. The Ilkhanate, based in Persia, where rulers eventually converted to Islam and revitalized Persian art and bureaucracy. The Chagatai Khanate, situated in Central Asia, remaining the most traditionally Mongol, but suffered from intense internal instability. While these states remained militarily powerful, they drifted apart. The title of Great Khan became a symbolic honorific rather than a governing reality. Internal civil wars and succession disputes began to sap the empire's collective strength. The Mongols were no longer a single pack of wolves. They had become four separate prides, each more concerned with local survival than the collective dream of Genghis Khan. The Black Death and the Fall, the same unprecedented connectivity that had made the Mongol Empire the wealthiest and most interconnected entity on Earth, ultimately proved to be its undoing. The Silk Road, which for decades had served as a golden artery for silk, spices, and revolutionary ideas, became a highway for a silent, microscopic killer. In the 1340s, a deadly pathogen, the Yersinia pestis bacteria, now known as the Black Death, emerged in the central grasslands and began to travel with terrifying speed along the Mongol trade routes. As the plague devastated populations from the Yangtze River in the east to the Thames in the west, the fragile glue holding the empire together began to dissolve. The Mongol administration, which relied on a constant flow of tribute, taxes, and communication through the Yam postal system, found itself paralyzed. Trade halted as merchants died in their caravanserais, and the vital tax revenues that funded the khanates dried up overnight. The Pax Mongolica, or Mongol peace, evaporated into a landscape of panic and isolation. In China, the demographic collapse and economic chaos fueled the Red Turban Rebellion, which finally toppled the Yuan dynasty in 1368, forcing the Mongols back into the northern steppes. In the Middle East, the Ilkhanate could not survive the loss of its urban centers and dissolved into a mosaic of warring, petty factions. By the end of the 14th century, the era of Mongol dominance was officially over. The great nomadic wave had crashed, but the political and social landscape it left behind was forever altered, giving rise to the centralized nation-states that would eventually define the modern era. The shadow of Tamerlane. Just as the Mongol flame was flickering out and the great Khanates were dissolving into the mists of history, a final, terrifying echo emerged from the heart of Central Asia. This was the rise of Timur, known to the West as Tamerlane, the sword of Islam and the scourge of God. Born as a minor noble in the Chagatai Khanate, Timur was a complex figure who claimed to be the spiritual and political heir to Genghis Khan's staggering legacy. Though he was likely a Turkic-Mongol mix rather than a direct descendant, he sought to restore the world-spanning empire of his predecessor through a series of military campaigns that were arguably more calculated and brutal than anything the world had seen before. Operating from his magnificent capital in Samarkand, a city he adorned with the spoils of a continent, Timur struck out in every direction. His armies descended upon India, where he sacked Delhi. They moved through Persia, leaving pyramids of skulls outside the gates of defiant cities. And they clashed with the rising Ottoman Empire, capturing Sultan Bayezid I at the Battle of Ankara in 1402. Unlike the early Mongols, who built the Yam system and the Pax Mongolica to facilitate trade and governance, Timur's empire was a personal one, held together by the sheer force of his terrifying will. While he sparked a short-lived Timurid renaissance, fostering grand architecture, Persian poetry, and astronomical science, his dominion was built on the foundations of terror rather than long-term administrative stability. He was a master of the battlefield, but he failed to create the institutional structures necessary to outlive his own legend. When Timur died in 1405 while on a march to conquer Ming China, his empire fractured almost immediately among his sons and grandsons. His passing marked the final gasp of the great nomadic empires that had haunted the dreams of sedentary civilizations for millennia. The age of the steppe warrior was ending. The age of gunpowder and the maritime state was about to begin. The lasting legacy of the Mongols. To view the Mongol Empire solely as a story of destruction is to miss the forest for the trees. The legacy of Genghis Khan is woven into the very fabric of our modern existence. Genetics. Studies have suggested that roughly 1 in 200 men alive today are direct descendants of Genghis Khan. His biological legacy is as vast as his territorial one. Statehood. The Mongols were responsible for the birth of several modern nations. They unified China after centuries of division and provided the administrative framework that would eventually become the Russian state. Globalism. By bridging the gap between East and West, the Mongols paved the way for the age of exploration. When the Silk Road eventually closed, following the fall of the Mongol states, European powers like Portugal and Spain were forced to find sea routes to the east, leading directly to the discovery of the Americas. Military science. The Mongol emphasis on mobility, psychological warfare, and merit-based leadership remains a subject of study in military academies today. They proved that a smaller, faster force could defeat a larger, static one, a lesson that remains relevant in the age of modern warfare. The universal ruler Genghis Khan began his life as Temujin, a desperate outcast on the frozen, unforgiving fringes of the known world, and he ended it as the undisputed master of the largest contiguous land empire ever assembled. His journey from a boy hunting rats for survival to a conqueror who commanded the fates of millions is perhaps the most improbable transformation in human history. Yet, he remains a figure defined by profound contradictions. He was a ruthless warlord who orchestrated massacres on an industrial scale, yet he was a visionary statesman who codified the Yasa laws and practiced a level of religious tolerance that wouldn't be seen in Europe for centuries. He was a destroyer of ancient cities, yet he was the primary patron of the greatest trade network the world had ever seen. Most remarkably, this illiterate nomad, who never lived in a house made of stone, recognized the power of the word and commissioned the first written Mongol script, ensuring his people's history would outlast his physical presence. The Mongol Empire served as the essential bridge between the ancient and the modern world. By dismantling the barriers of localism, it shattered the walls of isolation that had kept civilizations in silos for millennia. For a brief, shining moment, the world was forced to acknowledge its own interconnectedness, as a letter could travel from the shores of the Pacific to the gates of Europe under the protection of a single banner. This great unification catalyzed the exchange of gunpowder, printing, and the compass, the very tools that would later allow Europe to rise and the modern era to begin. The thunderous hoofbeats of the Mongol cavalry have long since faded into the silence of history, but the echoes of their empire still ring in the political borders of modern Asia. The diverse bloodlines of millions and the globalized technology we use today. The story of the Mongols is not merely a chronicle of war. It is the story of how the raw, untamed fire of the steppe forged the very foundations of our global age. Through conquest and commerce, Genghis Khan took a fractured planet and, for better or worse, began the process of welding it into a single, interconnected whole.